Hello, this is Justin Matthew. Welcome to Second Nature. In my previous lecture, we have explored the concept of the environment. And we have argued that environment is a complex and historically loaded concept that need to be located in a specific historical social context. And we have tried to understand the formation of the concept environment in the context of the Second World War and subsequent development as a global concern towards planetary existence of life. So similarly, when you examine the other important concept that environmental historians always use, that is nature. Nature is again a historically loaded term with many layers. However, one of the major problems that we encounter when you come across a new term, there is a tendency to define it. Define it means try to find an alternative term for it or try to simplify it. However, it is not easy to define a historically loaded, formed and transforming concept like environment or nature. When you define it, the problem is that we imagine a normal continuity of that term, of that condition over many centuries. And the common tendency is to imagine that our condition, our idea of nature is transhistorical and universal. What is our idea of nature, the dominant idea of nature in the modern capitalist society? We understand nature as a condition external to humans, or we consider nature as a realm of extra-human objects. There is a tendency to imagine nature as pristine, untouched by humans. Or we also imagine nature as a collection of objects that you can appropriate, transform, and transport elsewhere as a commodity. So then this idea of nature is specific to capitalist society. We have a tendency to imagine nature. If you imagine a nature a picture, it's either an object or a lake or a mountain. So like that, we understand nature as a resource bank, not a historically formed social idea. So then referring to this problem, Raymond Williams, in his wonderful article titled The Idea of Nature, he would argue that the idea of nature is the idea of man. That means our understanding is our society's understanding of nature. That means idea of a man who lives a capitalist reality, capitalist modern society. So we understand nature in terms of golden age or something that need to be dominated. So this shows that society's idea of nature tells us what kind of society you live in. So for many earlier societies, we have source material, data, or books and writings that help us to understand their idea of nature. So but when you think about a earlier society, previous society, we have a kind of a simplified understanding. We imagine earlier society's understanding of nature as an attempt to understand God. Then immediate conclusion is that either you being nostalgic about that concept, search for divinity, God, or we tend to consider it as a dominant tendency in the societies to consider it as a paganism or innocent or simplistic understanding, not rational understanding of nature as something measurable or countable. So as we understand it, or we have this dominant image of Eden Garden. That is myth of a lost world because of human touch. So nature ends when a human being touches it. So this idea. So or we imagine a rural past. If you are an urban dweller, there is a tendency to imagine rural past as a nature living. Going back to nature means go back to rural condition. All these ideas of nature, in a sense, coexist. Let me quote from a very well-known geographer, Neil Smith, and his work, Uneven Development. So in that work, he beautifully defines nature. Let me quote Neil Smith. The concept of nature is extremely complex and often contradictory. Nature is material and it is spiritual. It is given and made, pure and undefiled. Nature is order and it is disorder, sublime and secular, dominated and victorious. It is a totality and a series of parts. Woman and object, organism and machine. Nature is a gift of God and it is a product of its own evolution. It is a universal outside history and also the product of history, accidental and designed, wilderness and garden. So we know that all these concepts of nature are familiar to us in some form or other. So then how to locate this? How do we understand this concept of nature? We need to argue that, nature is to understand an earlier society's idea of nature. As a student of history, we need to locate nature as a reflection or part of lived experience of the past society. Their lived experience shaped their idea of nature. For instance, a considerable part of what we consider as natural landscape has undergone transformation over a period of time. And who transform it? It is a product of natural forces and their interventions. But at the same time, it is equally a product of human design and human behavior. So therefore, this idea of nature, that is, how do we understand the nature in terms of labor in our society? We understand the conquest of nature, the domination of nature, the exploitation of nature, or the preservation of nature. What I'm trying to discuss here is that, when we try to understand an earlier society's idea of nature, we helplessly follow our society and our idea of nature. So, but at the same time, we need to remember that all these concepts of nature that we read out earlier, Neil Smith's writing, are connected to labor. That refers to not just human relationship with nature. It also refers to relationship between man and man. Man and man in the sense, relationship between man and man is shaped by labor. Who controls nature as landscape? And who owns labor power? And who is working? So that shape our society's idea of nature, that is connected to our social position, caste, class, gender. All these are, factoring in. So therefore, one need to understand nature is a social experience. It is an uneven social experience. To understand this philosophically, I would recommend reading a wonderful philosopher of nature, R.G. Collingwood. So R.G. Collingwood, in his 1945 published work, The Idea of Nature. Remember that context, post-World War I and a great economic depression and also what we call the Second World War. This was a time when societies and scientists also, they started challenging this idea called progress, connected to science and enlightenment. Or we started challenging the idea called dominance, where we phrase domination of nature as a pathway to our development. So in that context, R.G. Collingwood examines examine that idea of nature in European thought, that long history. So he identified three major trends or phases in the formation of European idea of nature, European thought. They were, number one, ancient view. Collingwood considered ancient view as organic view of nature, nature as alive and organic. He's referring to Greco-Roman antiquity and earlier period. Second major trend was Renaissance and early modern view of nature. So in that context, he would argue early modern view, you can remember Copernicus or Newton. So nature as mechanical, nature as external to human, something that can be measured, decoded, and dominated. Then he identifies another trend that is a modern view of nature, that is historical. That historical view, nature is not a machine, but dynamic, evolving. It's an evolving process. So that's a modern scientific understanding, idea of nature. So, if you take inspiration from Raymond Williams and R.G. Collingwood, we can revisit our earlier societies, South Asia's early societies' idea of nature. And how do we assess their idea of nature without presentism, without a kind of, superimposing our idea, capitalistic modern idea of nature as an unchanging condition, background. So, we have great texts to understand early society's idea of nature. For instance, we have Vedas and Upanishads. For one example would be Rig Veda. Rig Veda is the oldest surviving text in the Indian subcontinent, or the oldest surviving poetry with extraordinary beauty and philosophical depth. When you use Rig Veda as a historical source, so there are debates among historians about its date. Some would argue it was kind of formulated between 6000 to 1000 BC. There are arguments that it's structured between 1500 to 1000 BC. Anyway, whatever the date issues are there, Rig Veda help us to understand different a world of gods, humans, animals, and natural objects. That was a world of creativity, a world of reciprocity, and mutually flourishing world, not a dichotomy of human versus nature. So, if I read from Rig Veda, the very first line of Rig Veda, it reads like this. I read the first hymn. I pray to Agni, the household priest, who is the god of the sacrifice, the one who chants and invokes and brings most treasure. So here, this god Agni is Agni is a god. At the same time, Agni is nature simultaneously. So, here we can say humans are part of that larger cosmic order. And when you read, for instance, Upanishads, let me, so if we quote from Chandogya Upanishad, so I quote, that chapter 6, Khanda 11, that one, hymn number 1. So, of this mighty tree, my dear, if someone should strike at the root, it would bleed but still live. If someone should strike at the middle, it would bleed but still live. If someone should strike at the top, it would bleed but still live. Being perverted by its living self, it stands firm, drinking in its moisture, which nourishes it, and rejoicing. So I'm quoting this from S. Radhakrishnan's translated Upanishads. So a wonderful book one should read. And what's the world of these hymns? We need to understand that's the world of agro-pastoralist. In that society, tree, they consider tree as a living self, tree image of life. So their nature is animate, and there is a continuum from a human to animal to other natural existence. So what was the social order of that society? these Vedas and Upanishads. So they were agro-pastoralists, largely referring maybe to northwestern India, and they engaged in greater agricultural activities. Their greater agricultural activities included improvements in building and equipments, land improvement, or deforestation, irrigation. All these activities were required, and they were specialized pastoralists. And all these activities required deforestation. Deforestation means dislocating animals and forest dwellers, conflict with them. So therefore, in a sense, they understood their idea of nature was coming from, coming from that social experience of labor, their engagement with nature, and also with, you know, um, um, other human beings. So they experience, for instance, a clear division that they experience grama and aranya, that is a village and forest. Not exactly in a modern sense as a resource bank, but as a organic part of organic whole. For instance, if you read Kalidasa's Shakuntala, so there you can see forest as a peaceful, gentle, and nurturing space. And that contrasted with the violence of royal courts, state formation, that is not, village or a state space. So, but at the same time, this was an interdependent world. What was that interdependence? Let me quote from a great historian of early India, B.D. Chattopadhyaya. So he would observe that, despite the contrast, forests were complementary to settled life. Forest provided both material resources and spiritual meaning. Let me quote from him. As a historical process, the forestscapes could never remain constant. Its boundaries would change, and particularly with the expansion of frontiers of the complex society, the forests themselves could be transformed into nuclei of complex societies. So, that's a life world of that early society. So, in that society, they understood nature as an ever-changing condition, nature as an idea connected to lived experience. But when we read, if you go online or visit a library and read, uh, you know, uh, ecological reading, socio-ecological reading of many of those readings on Vedas, Vedic idea of environment. So their idea is that we tend to apply our dualistic concept of humans versus nature to understand that. It's from that dualistic understanding we understand their rituals as symbols of environmental harmony, something specific to modern society only, or a concept that belong only to modern society, like sustainability as a social practice of early societies, or relation between men and kind of nature as a harmonious existence. So, these modern ideas are kind of getting imposed to understand an earlier whole. So, therefore, we really need to critically engage our own self-placement of civilization or civilized humanity at the center of everything. Only then we can understand an early society and their idea of nature. We'll further explore this idea of nature in the context of ancient Greek society. Thank you.